All right, everyone. Well, we're going to get started. Welcome to today's webinar, the 5 W's you must know when load testing. You know, web load testing is a flexible and quick way to make sure that you're ready for a successful holiday shopping season. Consider the fact that recent research has shown that 75% of consumers will go to a competitor's site as a result of poor performance during the holiday season. Delivering peak performance is a business requirement nowadays. In this webinar, we're going to cover the 5 W's you need to know when load testing. Mike will cover everything from when to test to what charts to analyze during your test. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Please make sure your telephone line is muted. We don't want to have anyone talking over Mike in the webinar. We will be making a recording of the webinar so that we can send it out and you can share it with any colleagues who weren't able to make this event. We want to take all the questions you have, so please submit your questions during the presentation. Use the question and answer function in the lower right-hand corner of the GoToWebinar application. At the end of the presentation, we'll stop and we'll answer all the questions that you do have. Today's presenter is Mike Punske. Mike's in charge of professional services at AlertSite. He's got over 15 years experience developing, delivering high-tech computing solutions from network operation systems to web applications and SaaS applications. Before joining AlertSite, Mike was the Director of Services for WebApper and has held positions at Brightcove, Adobe, Macromedia, Alaire, and Banyan. Mike also spent 12 years in the United States Air Force in telecommunications and computer operations. At this point, I'd like to hand over the presentation to Mike Punske.
Hi, everybody. So the topic that we have today is the 5 W's of web load testing, and what I mean by 5 W's is sort of the who, what, when, where, and why, and we'll get into that. As Bill said, I head up performance consulting, a web performance specialist, and spend probably the majority of my time these days running load tests. And AlertSite is a SmartBear business. Just want to point that out. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about why load testing is important. We're going to talk about when you should load test. We're going to talk about the internal and external aspects to load testing and which is better for you. We're going to look at charts and see sort of the information that you really need to look at to make your test effective. Here's a load testing definition that I pulled off of Wikipedia, and I think the thing that I notice more than anything else when I look at definitions of load testing is that everybody has a different definition. As a matter of fact, it goes beyond the definition. Everybody has different terminology to describe load testing. There are different types for sure, but a lot of these get used interchangeably, and different people use different words to describe the same thing. Things like stress testing, load testing, soak testing, endurance testing, component testing, performance testing. There are many names, and different companies and different people use them in different ways. But whatever you call it, there are many aspects of your site that can be tested. Things that we're going to be looking at would be the number of simultaneous users, for example, that can be effectively handled during a traffic spike, such as when you send out a marketing blitz. You can detect memory leaks that are only apparent after your site's been in heavy use for a certain period of time. We can determine what parts of your site are slowest and determine ways to improve that performance. You can also tune the configuration settings of your application server. In the past, I did a lot of performance tuning, and that involved running a test, tweaking some aspect of the settings, and rerunning the test and determining which setting provided the best performance. We can find and correct bottlenecks, and we can determine what error rates you get at various levels of load. Obviously, the more load that you have on your server, the more errors will be generated. And you can see where your site becomes ineffective, under what load and what circumstances. Additionally, you can determine if your new platform performs worse, the same, or better than your previous platform. This is something that I've had come up more and more recently, where a customer has a certain platform that their site sits on, and they're going to move to a new platform. Of course, you want to ensure that you're not losing anything by making that move. Everybody hopes they're moving to make it a positive experience. But if you run a load test before you move and get a baseline, then after you move, you can test again and find out exactly how you stack up compared to what you've had in the past. Next question, why? Why load testing is important. You can see here on the screen that user expectations have changed over time. I remember back in the day going out and running load tests, and customers were very happy if they had response time on individual pages that were 8 to 10 seconds. Sure, no one's going to complain if your site takes 10 seconds to load a page. That's expected. Not anymore. You can see it starting out somewhere around 8 seconds, and now, for the most part, customers, when they go to your site, are expecting to have pages come back between 2 and 4 seconds. If it goes longer than 4 seconds, there's going to be frustration. Additionally, load testing is important because you want to deliver a good user experience. You want to make sure that your site is not throwing errors under certain conditions. You want to make sure that your performance is where it needs to be. You want to make sure that all of the objects on your page are loading correctly. So that's something very good for you to be testing. Online performance equals business performance. Your online performance also boosts your search ranking. Your online performance impacts your market competitiveness. If somebody goes out looking for a pair of shoes, for example, and then goes to 3 or 4 different sites and has a really good experience on one of those sites, they're probably more likely to go back to that site in the future. As we've shown on the board here, user expectations are increasing. A site outage during peak periods is expensive. So you want to make sure that if you expect a certain level of business coming your way through your site, that you test for maybe 50% more, just in case. One of the big mistakes that's been made time and time again over the years is expecting a certain level of traffic and being pleasantly surprised by too much, and then the pleasant surprise turns to horror when the site crashes, because that can definitely hurt your business at that point. And you want to lower your business risk as much as possible. One other aspect to consider is the fact, and this statistic is a few years old, so it may be even more important now, but 74% of shoppers are likely or very likely to pre-shop online prior to making offline purchases. And that came from ComScore. I know I myself, if I'm going out to purchase something and I know I'll be going to the mall to pick it up, for example, I'll go online and shop before I leave the house. And I'll know exactly where I'm going when I get there, so I don't have to waste any time comparing things in different places. I know which thing I'm going to pick up. I know what the price is. And a lot of times now you can call ahead and have it waiting for you when you get there. You don't want great things to morph into disaster, so no surprises. The next question is when. When do you want to load test? This is a short list. You have things like launching a new website. That's sort of a no-brainer. If you're launching a new website, you want to make sure that it can handle the expected number of users that are going to be coming to it. A little less obvious might be a new application that you're putting up on your server in addition to the server applications that you already have. Sometimes that new application may be of surprisingly more interest than the other applications on your site, and that one might get a lot more business. You need to find out what you're going to be able to handle. Sometimes it's just a new feature. I was running a load test yesterday, and there was an aspect of their site that had been changed out for creating orders, and that particular piece of the site was not able to handle the traffic that the rest of the site was able to handle, and they needed to know what the level was that would be able to place orders. If you're adding new infrastructure, new hardware, incorporating new third parties and partners. Another piece is during mergers and acquisitions. This is something that we come across a lot, where two companies are going to be forming into one, and normally what happens there is that you get two completely separate websites. One of those sites will stay intact and add on to itself. The other site will go away. But you need to make sure that when the new site is added into the existing site, that the new site is able to handle all of the traffic that generates. Additionally, upgrading and virtualizing infrastructures, deploying new mobile initiatives, all of these things require you to do a little bit of testing and know what to expect. So these are just a few of the times when load testing is important. One thing that I want to point out is that load testing is not a one-off project. Load testing is iterative in nature, and it's most effective when you use it that way. So what you want to do is you want to test, you want to analyze the results of your test, you want to remediate any problems that you find or bottlenecks that you find, and then you want to retest. It's very important to realize this because you'll be able to set aside more time for testing and have much better results. One of the things that's very, very true is that when you test, you're going to find out what the bottleneck is. You're going to see that, for example, this particular piece of your application is the part that is the least likely to handle any additional load. So you clear that up. Go in, make it much more robust, add caching on things, on some of your queries coming back from the database so they don't have to go to the database to get a response. Do a few things to make that piece better, and now something else is the bottleneck. So testing and retesting is very key to getting better performance and better stability. If you're worried about how your site's going to handle this year's holiday traffic, the time to begin load testing is not early November, rather sometime around mid-September. After one round of testing, it may be determined that more or better hardware is needed. Hardware takes time to spec. You have to get the budget, you have to order it, it has to arrive, you have to install it, and then you have to configure and test. At that point, you retest, and you find out that your bottleneck is now your application's authentication scheme. So now your developers have work to do. They have to refactor that part of your application, and then you retest again and find another bottleneck. Try to leave as much time as possible to make sure that you can fully utilize your testing and the results that get generated. Next question would be, who should perform load testing. I think what that comes down to is 3 questions. Do you have the in-house expertise? Do you have people standing by in your organization that know, A, how to load test, and know how you need to have that testing performed? If so, then a software purchase may not be out of the question. Do you have the necessary hardware, software, and licenses to perform the testing? To perform large load tests, you need more than one server. You're going to need a controller. You're going to need agents to create load. Then you need software to run the load test and licenses to perform the testing. And the third question is, how quickly do you need this done? Companies that are expert at providing load testing can pretty much take your requirements and present you with your test in very short order, whereas it may be something that takes a very long time to put together out of the box. The next W is where. And I think this comes down to how your site is implemented, number 1, and number 2, what you're looking to test. So a site 10 years ago was much more simple than a website these days. In the old days, you might have a load balancer, and then on the other side of that load balancer, you had a few application servers. Sometimes the application server resided on the same machine as the web server. And in other cases, we actually had some customers that were using their database on the same server. But in most cases, you'd see the database sitting off behind the application and web servers. And that was 10 years ago. At that time, it was a simple prospect for somebody to go out and run the controller off. A consultant would come in, run the controller off of a laptop, set up a bunch of servers as agents, and run the load test inside your firewall. These days, it's a very different story. There are a lot more moving parts involved in your web application. Things like content servers, media servers, multiple load balancers and layers of load balancing, application servers, web services. You've got third-party components, social components. You've got pieces out in the cloud. You've got ad servers that you talk to, analytics servers that you talk to. And then you have different browsers, different devices, all handling your application in different ways. So the question about where to load test from now can be answered in different ways depending on what you're trying to test, but for the most part, you're going to end up a lot of the time outside of the firewall, either testing from a server cluster or from the cloud or even from browsers. So as a brief summary of places to load test from, you've got internal performance tuning, external, hosted cloud, and browser. And the question about where to load test from is there's not one answer that fits all. A lot of people claim it has to be done from the cloud. There are a lot of people screaming now that it has to be done from the browser. I personally feel that all of these answers are valid, including internal. It depends on what you're testing and what you need to ignore and what you need to concentrate on. If you're doing performance tuning of a piece of your application, then running your performance test inside your firewall is completely valid. Not only is it valid, but I would recommend it. You don't need all of the distractions that are coming from outside the firewall. You want to get very, very specific on what you're testing. If you're actually testing everything about your website, then you want to be outside the firewall, and it can be a hosted solution doing your load testing. It can be the cloud, and then you could also have testing from the browser or browser sampling. All of those are going to provide information that you need. Now, the top 5 charts and tables to review to successfully analyze your load testing results. The thing that I think everybody most closely associates with a load test is a basic quality graph. A basic quality graph, for the most part, shows you the number of users or virtual users. Here you can see that as the blue line, and then you're going to see successful transactions or requests, and that is the green line. And you're going to see warnings, that's yellow, and we can barely see them on this particular test, but errors, that's the red line that's sort of bouncing along the bottom of the screen here. What you'll notice is that over time, your successful transactions and your warnings both go up. And I've seen a lot of tests where you get to a certain number of users and you stop seeing successful transactions and see only red. But it's a very good and important chart. It's one that you can't go without. You need to know. And also, you'll notice that the users are added to this in a stepwise manner, and that is so that you can see what happens under each level. 10 users here, 20 here, 30 here, and if you run it for a while at the same level of load, it gives the server a little bit of time to stabilize and process things at that level. This is one that I personally love, the average page load time. And what you're seeing here is, here are the 5 pages that were being tested on this particular website, and this is how long it took each page to load. This is the page itself loading, as well as all the objects on that page. So you can tell this is a problem. If you look at this, you're going to see that page 1, which was the home page, took a lot longer to load than any other page during the test. One thing that you definitely want to do on your site is have your first page, your home page, be one of the fastest loading pages. That's a user's first impression of your company when they come to your website. And also, if they can get to that first page, it gives them a lot to look at, and they'll be a little bit more patient going to a second and third page once they have a little bit of buy-in. But the real reason that you want to have this page load time chart is it's going to show you where your problems are, and it's going to tell you which pages need some remediation done to them. And as you do the work, you can see the changes immediately. Here's another one, top time-consuming requests. Now, when I say requests, I'm not talking just about a page, but I'm talking about the objects on that page. This could be an image, this could be CSS, JavaScript, it could be some social component that's on your page, or the HTML itself. But having the top time-consuming URLs or requests listed is a great way to go about tuning your site. You can look at this and you can say, wow, we've got almost half a second tied up in this one request over here, and that means that you need to get after that right away. As soon as you go in and fix what's causing that to be so slow, you're going to have another one that bubbles to the top. And so it's like a constant list of things that you can do to help make your site performance better. Additionally, a rolled up request per request, and this is grouped by pages. So this is actually showing all of the requests on a page and grouping them by pages. So you can actually see all of the requests, see everything that's slow, everything that's fast, get a good idea of the overall speed and performance. Here's another one, total network throughput. On this particular chart, you're seeing what you normally see. The chart is going up and down sort of in a pulsating manner. And what this tells me is that the particular load test that was run, the users were started kind of close together. So they were mostly doing the same sorts of things at the same time. And when one was pausing, a lot of them were pausing. So you're seeing it move in a cyclical manner where more content's going out, and then it would drop off a little bit waiting, and then more would go out, up and down. What this chart is very good for is detecting when there are artificial bottlenecks that could be imposed by something like a router, NIC card, firewall. I know I had a load test last month, I believe it was, where there was a setting that was put on to their firewall that was limiting traffic to a certain amount. And once we hit that, it flatlined. So what you saw here was throughput increased to a certain point as you added virtual users, and then it got to the top and it flatlined all the way across. Once we saw that, it was very easy to know what the problem was. It was simply a matter of tracking down the problem. Okay, so those are the 5 W's. AlertSite has load testing services, and the way that we go about it is the scenario gets defined using DataClick, which if you're an AlertSite customer, you're very familiar with. DataClick is the way that you record all of your business transactions to be monitored. But we use the same thing, whereby you can create a scenario using DataClick and upload it into your console, and then we can turn that into a load test for you. We have the ability to either leave in or remove third-party content. We can leave in some, remove others, and use a hybrid approach. But I think for the most part, because a user going to your site doesn't care if content on your site is coming from a third party or from you, they look at everything on your site as being you. It's very good to leave in third-party content unless it interferes with the quality of the load test. Tests are scheduled and results are available inside your AlertSite console. So all of your tests are stored there for your future reference. And you're assigned a load test engineer. The load test engineer will manage the project, do customizations, monitor the tests, no matter when those occur. I know that a lot of people don't feel comfortable having any load tests run unless it's 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. If it is, your engineer will be watching that test run and taking corrective action if there is any need. And our experts can have your test up and running quickly. A final thing is consultative interpretation. Getting a report about your site and your site performance is one thing, but being able to talk to your load test engineer and go over items in depth and actually get some recommendations can be something else and very valuable to you. Anybody that was on this call today, if you do decide to do any load testing with us, we're offering 10% off from now through the end of September. Just make sure to mention this webinar. And we'll also be at shop.org September 12th through 14th in Boston. Here's our contact information. You can contact AlertSite itself. You can feel free to send me an email at my SmartBear address below. And now we'd like to open up the lines for any questions. Bill?
All right, Mike, thank you very much. That's very helpful information for sure. This would be a great time to submit any questions you have using the question and answer function in the lower right hand of the GoToWebinar application. We have had one or two questions come in so far, Mike. The first asks, if I run a load test and the response times get to be too long, where should I look first to fix this?
That's a big question, actually, because it really depends on your site and what you're doing. Sometimes you can look at it and say, wow, that's the search page, and we were running this particular search, and it was taking 30 seconds to come back, which is unacceptable, and you know exactly where to look. Other times, you have to go back and look at the page that was coming back slowly or the object that was coming back slowly and find ways to optimize it. A lot of times that involves caching. Sometimes it involves swapping out components for components that operate in a more performance-oriented manner.
All right, good. We got another question that's come in. It asks, do you have any recommendations on how to determine how many virtual users I need for a load test? Do most sites try to test at like a certain level, 2 or 3x their normal traffic load to represent peak traffic?
Well, normally that question always gets asked, so it's a very important one to know the answer to. One thing that we look at is if, for example, you're load testing to prepare for the holiday season, the one thing that I can always point people to is history. Look at your history. Over the last 4 years, how many users have you had come to your site during the holiday period? How much has that increased year over year? And then always plan on a certain percentage more. So if you know that your peak load is 30,000 users in a day, for example, and it's been increasing at 20% year over year, you might want to say, okay, this year instead of 30,000, we're going to test it plus an additional 40%. So always leave a little buffer in case you get more people coming to your site than you expect. If you're going to be doing something like advertising during the Super Bowl, all bets are off. I would suggest testing it 2 or 3 times what you normally expect.
All right, that's great. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. The first one asks about DesiaClick support. It says, does DesiaClick support Silverlight-based applications?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. There is Silverlight support built into DesiaClick.
Okay. The next question we have is related to load testing session handling. It asks, are sessions launched individually, and is there cookie support available?
Yes, that is the case. Each individual user, or virtual user in this case, will have its own session, and there is cookie support. Sometimes it's a little bit more of a workout to ensure that sessions are carried over from page to page than other times. It all depends on how a site is programmed. If it's merely a matter of keeping that session through the cookies, that's not a problem at all. If you have 1,000 users, you're going to have 1,000 sessions.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions that have come in. The next one asks, does the load testing support websites with JavaScript and or Ajax?
It does. I mean, we can definitely test a site that, irrespective of the technology that created it. So Java sites we can definitely test. Ajax is a little bit different. Currently, AJAX calls are handled sequentially by our software, and so if you have an AJAX page, for example, that's making 200 calls, and it's doing them, 20 of those calls are going at the same time, we're not able to do it in parallel. Those are sequential. So that's one of the places that we have to watch out for. But it's on the roadmap to put some intelligent handling in for those so that they can go out in parallel.
Okay. Well, we've got one last question, and it asks, is there any experience that you've had testing ad servers for performance testing? Can you recommend a sort of de facto acceptable response time for quality of service?
No, actually. Almost every customer that I run load testing for requires that we remove calls to the ad servers. There have been a couple recently where they did not state to remove calls to the ad servers, and those calls actually cause problems on the page. One of the reasons is that the load test records exactly what happens during a particular run. So you'll go through the site, and the ad server is going to be serving up a particular ad. When you go back through and request those pages again, the ad that comes back from the ad server may be totally different. And in that case, it can be a different sized image, and the load test server thinks there's an error taking place. So we've had to go in and script around that. But no, we haven't actually come up with any numbers for a response coming back from ad servers.
Okay. Well, Mike, thank you very much. Very helpful information. We'd like to thank everyone for attending today. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Mike via his contact information or to visit the AlertSite website. At the end of the webinar, there's a little survey we'd like you to fill out. We'd love to hear your thoughts on new topics that you'd like to hear us cover. So if you'd fill that out, that'd be great. Thanks again, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.